life is no thrill. It's worse than nil. So draw the right conclusion. Let them be still.
Welcome to episode number 76 of the Exploring Antinatalism Podcast, a podcast showcasing the wide range of perspectives and ideas throughout antinatalism as it exists today, through interviews with antinatalists and non-antinatalist thinkers and creators of all kinds, now running 4 years strong. I'm your host, Amanda Sukenick, and today I'm speaking with Lawrence Anton and John Williams, who today reveal to the world their new antinatalist activist organization, Anti-Natalist Advocacy. Welcome to the Exploring Antinatalism Podcast, Lawrence and John. How are you guys today?
Good, thank you.
Yeah,
Excellent.
all good.
Awesome. So this is a really exciting episode. I want to thank the both of you for allowing the Exploring Antinatalism Podcast the true pleasure and honor of being able to share the amazing news, the inauguration of a new antinatalist organization, Antinatalist Advocacy. So excited to jump into everything you guys have been working on. It's always wonderful when a new group pops up. It's been a while since the launch of a new group, and there's certainly a lot of holes within the world of antinatalist advocacy that need to be filled. A lot of work to be done in the world of the good that antinatalism can do in the world. So this is really exciting. I was wondering if we could just take a brief moment. I mean, I obviously, Lawrence, you and I know each other quite well. John, this is the first time you and I have really gotten a chance to speak. But I was wondering if we could just take a moment, if both of you could sort of tell me who each of you are, a little bit about yourselves, and explain why you are antinatalists.
Sure, I'll go first because I know that Lawrence likes to talk about himself and I don't want to be drowned out. Thanks so much for having me on, Amanda. It's great to finally meet you. It's a bit of a legend in the antinatalist community. So I'm John, 28, living in London. I've been an antinatalist now for about 3 years. I guess my antinatalist journey, if I'm allowed to say that without it sounding too cliched, is quite a typical one. I became a vegan, like an animal rights advocate, back in 2016. And then after about 4 years of being a vegan and, understanding that there are definitely some sentient beings like animals and factory farms where it'd be better not to bring them into existence, I stumbled across an interview on Cosmic Skeptics YouTube channel with David Benatar. And I think I said to Lawrence before, for some reason, when I first heard about Benatar's views, I had like a negative perception that he was going to be like super angry and misanthropic and all this kind of stuff. And it's totally unfair because, as a vegan, there's lots of like stereotypes about vegans and, misconceptions that people have. So I had no space. I should have been much more empathetic towards this idea when I first heard it. But then listen to that interview. I listened to a whole bunch more interviews by David Benatar, and I was thinking, wow, this philosophy is really holding up in an intellectual sense. And then the thing that really brought it home for me was that, unfortunately, that year, my uncle passed away. And I've lived quite a blessed life in terms of having known that many people to have died. And this, it really did concretize the ideas in my head, the idea that things happen in life. It was a cancer diagnosis we knew nothing about before. These kind of things can happen. And there's a terrible risk that, when we bring sentient beings into existence, that they will have these things happen. You can't guard against things like that. So that really kind of brought the ideas home for me, was this personal experience, as well as like exploring it in a more philosophical sense. And then when I finally read Better Never to Have Been, which I try not to sound too kind of like, I don't know, too biblical and like David Benatar as the Messiah, but it is such a fantastic book. It's one of those few books that can be both like a philosophy book and also like accessible for a general audience. So even if you are an antinatalist, I still recommend reading it just to, because it is such like a foundational text, if you like, in the antinatalist community. So that's a bit about how I became an antinatalist. I'm sure we get onto how we started antinatalist advocacy in a bit.
Absolutely. We're going to cover all of that. Yeah. Thank you for sharing your story, John. I'm very, very sorry about the loss of your uncle. My condolences for sure. But yeah, it's wonderful to, I already sort of know this just from videos that you've done with Lawrence on his channel, but it's really good that the both of you have such a firm foundation in animal rights, ethics, veganism. It's a very good, strong foundation to then go to antinatalism second. And yeah, nothing wrong with giving huge accolades to the work of Benatar. It's truly seminal, important work. So well, wonderful. Thank you so much, Lawrence. I do believe it's your turn.
Yeah, well, so I'm Lawrence, also in London as well, but John and I are on opposite sides of London. And yeah, I won't like revisit my full story of how I became anti-natalist, because I think people are maybe sick of it. But I think I've been anti-natalist for around 5-6 years now, something like that. And then maybe just two sort of quick things to touch on since then is the first one was Amanda and I'm not sure if you mentioned this after we hit record or if it was before, but I've been on before because you, Amanda, and myself and a few others, we went out on a venture, or however you want to put it, to start Anti-Natalism International. And yeah, and then I can't remember how long it was ago now, maybe like 2 years or something now, something like that. Yeah. Then I went my own way from that and started doing the YouTube channel, which has been steadily growing to the point now where I think it's like 1.6 thousand subscribers, there or thereabouts. So like a modest channel, but hopefully it will be less modest in the future. And yeah, I think that's basically me. I think the very abridged version.
Excellent. Yeah, no, your antinatal story is really fascinating. You've been involved in so many projects over a short period of time, really important projects. And the channel is doing fabulously. It's grown so much just over the last year. So congratulations on that, Lawrence. John, I forgot to ask you, do you also have a YouTube channel?
I don't know. Unfortunately, my contributions to YouTube have all gone through Lawrence's channel, and he's pocketed
Nothing wrong with that.
all of the ad revenue. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah. I don't quite have the talent for putting together videos. Like Lawrence's videos in particular, are very polished and just very well just put together, and I don't really have the knack for doing that. But I do love a lot of anti-natalist content out there. I came across yours as well, Amanda. Although your channels have some of them been banned and
yes,
and re-uploaded. Yeah.
Oh yes, yes they have. Well, I'll just go over the story very briefly. Yeah, so when I originally started in the YouTube area, I started out on YouTube about 15 years ago as a toy reviewer. So that channel is still up. That one's not banned yet. But I started in the YouTube world, the Antinatalist YouTube world about 13 years ago with a channel called Forever Wolf Films, and that channel was just unceremoniously killed in 2021, I think, for very strange reasons. No strikes, no nothing, just death. So it is what it is. But hopefully this one will last and stand the test of time. We'll see. But no, hey, nothing wrong with not being a video maker. But on that subject, so yeah, so I'd love to hear about how the two of you found each other and started working with each other. I became aware of the fact that you two were working with each other pretty consistently and had a real good thing going because, Lawrence, you've had John on your channel. And you guys made some excellent videos about antinatalism and effective altruism. I think there are a couple of other subjects I'm forgetting offhand. But yeah, I'd love to hear about how this friendship started and how you guys have come to work with each other.
Do you wanna cover it, John? Or?
Oh, Lauren, you have such a good way of making it sound, all wistful and romantic. So I reckon you should tell this story.
After 76 episodes, I gotta be at least good at that,
right? Okay, cool. So I can't remember the date of when this was, but I'd say it was probably around a year ago now, given that it's summer again in the UK. And in London, there is a small debate group, vegan debate group in London, where we, you know, meet occasionally and have a different topic each time. And I got invited to join this debate group. John was already in it, and the first one I attended was on antinatalism, actually. And I think the reason for that probably was that John was already in there, but since I got added in, I probably brought up this. I can't remember for sure, so this could be all like wrong, but I think I must have brought up the subject in the chat or something, and then we decided, well, should we just have this as a debate topic? And I think John and I were the sort of resident proponents. Anyway, so John and I, officially met there, and then on the way back from that debate that we had on Primrose Hill, if anyone knows London, we were walking back to the same train station, and we were just talking about how the contrast between the animal rights community and the anti-natalist community, given that the animal rights community is, or animal rights / vegan community, however you want to put it, has a very strong activist contingent. It's kind of hard to be part of the community and not come across plentiful opportunities to do all sorts of different activism. Very accessible for anyone really with any capacity in any sort of skill set to get involved. And we were talking about how it just doesn't seem the case like that's the case for antinatalism. And so we were talking about that, but we were also talking about how one issue that there is in the animal rights movement is that it's good. There's loads of people being active and doing stuff, but there's only a small subset, small in terms of individuals, subset of people that are actually critically examining their own forms of activism and thinking, well, actually, you know, are we doing something that we can somewhat measure the impact of? You know, you don't have to be precise and put exact numbers on it, but just somewhat be able to see like what impact we're having. Try and learn from research that's been done, try and essentially do evidence-based activism to have, you know, a bigger impact than we may otherwise have. And we thought it's the norm really not to do that in animal rights advocacy. A lot of people do sort of talk about, oh, I do this because I think it's more effective, but actually when you push down to it, it's often not based on much, which you know is not. I'm not saying it to berate people in any way. Like I did that for a long time as well when I was engaging in animal rights activism more than I am now. But anyway, so John and I were talking about those two things, and we just thought, you know, actually it would be really good if there was more encouragement for the average antinatalist to be more active in terms of trying to do good in the world rather than just have the quote unquote correct opinions, if you get what I mean. Which obviously we do have. No, well, yeah, whatever. Anyway. And yeah, so we wanted to encourage that, but we also wanted to encourage a culture in the activism of reflection, trying to be as evidence-based as we can, although obviously there's going to be some barriers to that, given that anti-natalist advocacy in general is just so young. So there may not be much that we can go on, but we can still learn from the stuff that's out there. So we basically had that conversation with those sort of 2 points. And then we came up with this idea. We met for the first time in like a pub in Shoreditch, again, if anyone knows London.
Lawrence was late, predictably.
Yeah, I was late.
You ever try and schedule anything with a vegan, they're always going to be late. That's just the way it is. Only by about 10 minutes.
That B12 deficiency, you know.
Exactly.
Right.
We can't figure out like train schedules and things like that with all that B12 deficiency going
on. Yeah, and then just very quickly, just to round off, because I don't want to drag this, answer out too much, but there was a fourth person supposed to be here today, which is Alana, who sadly couldn't be with us because she's feeling a bit under the weather. But after I can't remember how many meetings we'd had, but John and I had been thinking about, it would be good to get at least one or two more people on board so that we can expand capacity, but not balloon so that it just flash in the pan sort of stuff. And so we were just passively keeping an eye out on anyone that comes into contact or whatever. And Alana emailed me, and just, you know, she sounded very engaged, all of this sort of stuff. And so John and I thought, well, let's just, you know, put a proposition to her and lay it out and just say, look, this is what we want to do. You sound very aligned with what we want to do. Would you be interested in getting on board? Then we had a call with her and she joined, and she's been amazing since. And now we're at this point now. Yeah.
Amazing. Well, I regret not being able to meet Alana today, but but there are, and I hope she feels better. So there are 3 or 4 of you that are now firmly a part of Antinatalism Advocacy. 3. Okay. Excellent. Yeah. Excellent. Okay. Well, I'd love to meet her another time for sure. John, did you want to say anything on this front about how you guys came together?
I think, Lawrence, you've really covered everything well there. I guess one thing that we did also notice was that there's not really like an antinatalist advocacy infrastructure, if you like. I remember one of my tasks when we first meet up was to see really what's out there. I think Andy did a wonderful episode with Lawrence about the history of like online antinatalist activism, which was really illuminating. But in terms of really what's out there, like I came across, obviously knew about this podcast, and I came across Annie, but there wasn't really much. And there's 2 ways you can look at it. The first one is quite a, you know, obviously a down way and think, I wish there was more out there. But also we thought this is quite an important point for antinatalist activism, and how, because it is in its early stages, the decisions that we make now as the people who get involved, they can have massive, like long run states, you know, really long run consequences. Like the approach taken in vegan advocacy is very much that kind of individual one-to-one change, get everyone to go vegan on a one-to-one basis is very much the dominant activism approach. And whether that's right or wrong, if that hadn't been the case and there'd been a different form of activism that's quite prominent, there's every chance that by now that, you know, vegan advocacy would look really, really different. So that was another thing that Lawrence and I were thinking, especially with this like impact focus, was wondering that if we can have like an impact focus and really try and think carefully about having the biggest positive impact as possible with our antinatalist advocacy, then now is a really important time to kind of have those conversations and put that stuff into place, because it is like a hinge moment or a turning point, I think, in this early stage of antinatalist activism.
100%. I mean, I agree so much with everything both of you just said. I mean, antinatalist activism is so young. It is so immature. It needs infrastructure. It needs leadership. It needs guidance. It needs all of these things. And it's tough. It's tough putting oneself in that kind of role. And the community is at a difficult stage. I mean, it doesn't really know what it wants. Doesn't really know whether it wants to be a depressed, angry child, or whether it wants to sort of grow up and be that force in the world that can do all of this good and prevent suffering. And that's why it needs groups like this. It needs organizations, and it needs that infrastructure. It needs exactly what I think you said, Lawrence, that sort of evidence-based feedback of like, what kind of impact are we having? Because at the moment, antinatalism, it's certainly growing. It's certainly more visible. I mean, we're there, we're out loud and proud about it, but like, it's not really having a tremendous impact, certainly, I mean, if at all, really, on actual birth rates or the way people are, or it's not necessarily influencing the way that I think it can in terms of animal ethics. And so, yeah, so there is definitely time, and this is exactly the kind of thing that antinatalists need to be putting together and need to be the direction that antinatalism needs to be taking. So I'd love it if you guys can tell me just sort of, you know, what is antinatalism advocacy? I know that in the email that you sent me, I mean, we've talked about this a little already, but in the email that you sent me, Lawrence, you know, you said the sort of the goals, the focuses are human reproduction, of course, animal agriculture, wild animal suffering, and artificial sentience. So you guys are covering a all the bases, basically, which I love. That's exactly what, in my opinion, a real anti-natalist advocacy group needs to be doing. So please, I mean, whichever one of you wants to start first. I mean, tell me what the goals are and how you wish to proceed with everything that you'd like to accomplish.
Do you want to go, John?
I just told maybe if you want to go through the 4, or would you like?
Oh, okay, cool. Yeah, so to give like an overview, there's, I think, maybe the best way to do it is to cover the 4 sort of cause areas. And I'm just saying this now so that in case I forget, you can remind me of what I was going to cover. So I think the 4 cause areas, then we've also got sort of 6, don't know what the best word is, but I think we've called them like activities that we want to do. And then maybe just a few other bells and whistles. So to start with some bells and whistles. So with Anti-natalist advocacy, what we really wanted to do is essentially be an organization that facilitates anti-natalists to essentially realize the capacities, capabilities, abilities, however you want to put it, that they have, right? I think maybe sometimes people maybe get the perception of like, oh, there's a new organization and they are saying this is the way we need to do things. And either people align with that or they don't. And so they either subscribe to the organization or they don't. One thing that Anti-natalist advocacy really wants to do is help nurture a culture of essentially just having an open discussion about, okay, well, what exactly are our goals and as a movement, a community, and then what are the most effective ways to realize those goals? And if we don't know, then how can we facilitate research as a community to do that, right? So we really want to, one, we're going to do our own stuff, obviously, but we also want to like facilitate being able to help others to get involved in antinatalist activism or advocacy in ways that are appropriate to their skill sets. So that, I guess that's the sort of broad overview. So when we were thinking about, okay, well, what are we aiming at? What are the sort of key issues that we want to address? Well, obviously, the main thing about antinatalism is not wanting new beings to come into existence. So obviously the main key thing is going to be that, but we thought there are 4 core areas that can kind of be broken down into. The first one is human procreation. Obviously standard. Don't think you really need to go into that much more as antinatalist. That's kind of, that's kind of like your bread and vegan butter of the antinatalist world, right? So that's one cause area that we identified, and I can maybe just touch on like one example for each of the cause areas. So one example that I really like in terms of already established, already happening activism that antinatalists can support in terms of human reproduction that has been tested by established charity evaluators and stuff like that is this charity called Family Empowerment Media, which from what I've seen so far, and I've watched talks that they've done and listened to things, read media that's been put out about them, all of this sort of stuff, and everything I've seen of theirs I've found really promising and really, really good. So very briefly, they essentially put out educational material via radio, usually, to areas generally in sub-Saharan Africa that don't have access to that information otherwise. And they are areas that have been identified as having low levels of contraception use, basically. And Family Empowerment Media have been identified as an effective charity by charity evaluators. So if someone wants to have like a pre-established organization that they want to give to, and they know that out of all the organizations working on this, this one has been deemed to have the most sort of rigorous backing in terms of evidence and impact, family empowerment media seem like a really good bet. So they seem like really exciting to me. They are in the middle of a randomized control trial as we speak, which I think is happening until the end of the year. And that's and you if anyone finds any of their talks or articles and stuff, I think they mention it in basically everything that is recent, so you can find out about that way. But anyway, so that's one example with human procreation. Moving on to the next one is animal agriculture. So with animal agriculture, obviously this is a massive way that sentient beings are being brought into existence, dwarfs human procreation massively, and the quality of the lives being brought into existence are just on average way lower, way worse than humans. And so obviously this is a massive issue that antinatalists are going to want to help address. We want to prevent those lives, especially those lives, from coming into existence, just because there's so many and they're so bad. And the reason we focused on animal agriculture rather than just domesticated animals generally is because animal agriculture is the main driver of domesticated animals being brought into existence. And yeah, one example of again a charity, and for each of the examples I'm going to be giving examples of charities and organizations, but by no means is that saying that these are the only forms of activism that can be effective. This is one thing that we're going to be realizing a lot and talking about a lot with antinatalism, is that because the landscape is so bare in terms of activism, we genuinely don't know what the most effective forms are. So we've got to go off what the sort of semblances of things that are already out there, of organizations or people who maybe aren't necessarily antinatalist, but they align with us in some way, and they've already done work like family empowerment media. It's not in any way an antinatalist organization. And I doubt any of the people who work for it are antinatalists, but it's something that we can align on, and the framework's already there. Why reinvent the wheel? So yeah, one example for animal agriculture is the Humane League, which has been again ranked by charity evaluators that if you're going to give your money to essentially help try and end animal agriculture and prevent domesticated animals from coming into existence, that seems like one of the best bets. Then moving on to wild animal suffering. So obviously wild animal suffering still involves non-human animals, but it's distinct from domesticated animals, animal agriculture, because this is an issue. This is the one issue of the 4 cause areas that actually humans do not facilitate. Or we maybe in like conservation in some small fringe part we do, but by and large wild animal suffering is in terms of the beings brought into existence is not something humans are facilitating. This is something that would be happening anyway. So but it's still a concern to antinatalists. Obviously it doesn't, there's still beings being brought into existence with by and large horrible lives, and often very short as well. So again, yeah, that's a cause area. One example of a charity that's doing work on this, which interestingly, I think specifically antinatalists will be interested in this, is that they have written articles about and are facilitating research on the contraceptive use in wild animal situations or cases, however you want to put it, which I think would be of particular interest to antinatalists. That's Wild Animal Initiative. Again, they've been ranked as a effective charity that if you put your money into, that money is going to go to, not bureaucracy as it may do for many charities. The majority of it is going to be going to the mainly research I think they do at this point, and hopefully with wild animals in the long run having a positive impact and less of them coming into existence. Then the 4th one, and I will, stop rambling. Maybe I'll hand over to you, John, for the activities, the 6 activities. But the 4th one of the cause areas is artificial sentience, as you said. So this one is the bit more sci-fi one that maybe people will, turn off and be like, like it's not going to happen or whatever. And hopefully it won't, we don't, essentially, like, consciousness is still kind of a mystery to us. So we don't know if it's something humans are going to be able to replicate in without the process of procreation, basically. So we don't know if artificial sentience is going to be an issue, but it could be an issue. And if it is realized, if we do create sentience in an artificial, although some people have issues with that term, in an artificial way, that could be really bad, because then with humans, with animals, you need to inseminate them, and then gestation happens, and then you can exploit them again, or have another reproductive cycle. But there's an inherent limitation there on time, whereas with artificial beings, in theory, they could just be boom, 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 just made more and more and more, and it's got the potential to be very bad. So, and as an example of an organization working on that is the Sentience Institute. I believe they are a registered charity, and they do, again, this is an area where it's not got an amazing amount of research, especially on the philanthropic side of, like, how we would be impacting the potentially sentient AIs. So they're doing research into that, and it's all very interesting stuff. But yeah, I'll hand over to John after I've just spoken for ages. So.
Can I ask just a really quick question before we hand it over to John? I mean, thank you so much for that explanation, Lawrence. I mean, all of these different, organizations and groups that you mentioned. I love hearing that you're thinking in those kinds of terms. I just was curious: are you planning on contacting these groups? Building a relationship with them? Because one thing that I do think antinatalists need to, not that I'm saying you guys have to do this, but I mean, there's a lot of misconceptions about us, and there's a lot of fear about antinatalism. And so, I'm just curious, like, if part of your trajectory will maybe, include sort of like outreach in that kind of way, like, hey, because it's, set those working or fearing the risk of artificial intelligence, those working, in wild animal suffering. I mean, antinatalism is a really important missing piece, I feel, to what they're doing, and as well as for animal agriculture and all the rest too. But I'm just using those two as an example. So these relationships are extraordinarily important to foster and nurture. So I was wondering what your plans are as far as that, if at all.
Yeah, so to answer your question in just a broad way is yes, we want to ourselves, build bridges with other groups that are doing work on these, 4 areas. And in the future, in some way, we'll want to help, other antinatalists build bridges as well. We don't want to become gatekeepers, but also a bottleneck as well. But to be more specific, we'll maybe get onto it later, so I won't say too much now. But there are of those ones examples I just gave, of those specifically, multiple of them, I will very soon be personally reaching out to them to get them involved in something we're working on for later this year. But I think we'll get onto that in full later, so I won't say anything more now.
Excellent, Lawrence. Excellent. That's great. That's great. Well, I'm sorry to have interrupted you, John. Please go ahead.
Oh, it's all. Amanda, you made a really important point there about forming relationships. And we were talking earlier about maybe some missteps, we feel like missteps, or areas that we would have liked, like vegan advocacy or animal advocacy, to be different. And that is that a lot of vegan activists are not very good at building bridges. Both building bridges externally to organizations or individuals that aren't vegan but could have a really positive impact. I'm just thinking of an example, an organization as an example called Compassion in World Farming, who they're not a vegan organization, but my God, their ideas of a world without factory farming would be a lot closer to a vegan world than what we've got now, where 80 billion land animals, most of them in factory farms. And I just feel that vegans aren't very good at forming links, especially with non-vegans. It's like, if you're not vegan, we don't want to talk to you. And where we are at Antinatalists, there are so few people who identify with the term that if we just waited around or only spoke to those who absolutely agreed with us and everything, we would never get anywhere. So part of these 4 cause areas that Lawrence went through, a part of our approach to them is looking to form those relationships you were talking about, Amanda, and form alliances where we can have positive impact and to be strategic and to be empathetic to people who maybe don't, they're not card carrying antinatalists. But yeah, I'm going to talk through the actions that Lawrence mentioned earlier, the activities, the 6 core activities from our theory of change. And a theory of change, if you don't know, is basically a diagram mapping out what you're planning to do and the change that you're looking to have. And in terms of the core activities, one of them is very simply networking, which ties into what we were saying earlier around getting antinatalists together and people who align on different things to come together to devise new strategy and that kind of thing. So at Antinatalist Advocacy, we really are looking to provide like platforms and opportunities for people to come together and to foster that community, like positive, that proactive, impact-focused activism ethos that we were talking about earlier. And another key activity is disseminating information, so a bit like what we're doing now, and also a couple of podcasts, which we'll get a bit more, give a bit more detail on in a bit. Another one is around supporting organizations. Now, this one is a little bit further down the line, but we talked about how there isn't a huge amount of antinatalist infrastructure out there and how we would love for there to be lots of organizations that align with what we're trying to do. So providing a kind of community and hopefully a platform and some guidance for organizations to come about to put some of these good ideas into practice. Then a really key one, which aligns with Alana's podcast, which we'll talk about in a bit, is around supporting individuals. I know you've mentioned, Amanda, previously that understandably, a lot of antinatalists are struggling, particularly with their mental health. And unfortunately, some of the places, especially online places that antinatalists meet, I don't know if they're necessarily congruent with like creating a positive, forward-thinking kind of environment. Now I can see Amanda shaking her head. But yeah, so, and it's totally understandable. It's not a judgment point. It's totally understandable that antinatalists would be struggling in this world. But one of the key things we want to do is, again, provide resources, provide spaces for people to come together, resources for people to support themselves so that they are in a good place and then can go out and have this positive impact in the world that we think that antinatalists can have. And linked to that, as well as the networking point, was around like community building. So again, creating spaces for antinatalists to come together. Within the vegan space, you've got not just like activism opportunities, but you've also got like vegan clubs. You've got vegan camp out that me and Lawrence, there's activities for people to come together, because I certainly found it when I first met Lawrence, it's like, once you meet another card-carrying antinatalist, there is an element of like, oh, it's nice to meet someone who can empathize with this kind of worldview. And having those kind of positive spaces is really important. So community building. And then the final one, and something we're looking to do a bit more of next year, is around conducting primary research. So Lawrence and I were talking that we were saying before that we don't really know. There's just a lot of research that could be done about antinatalism, like what, who is the antinatalist community? What is it that causes people to become antinatalists? What are antinatalists' views to things like animal agriculture? Like, do they take a sentiocentric view? We don't really know this stuff. Obviously, we can go through personal experience in our Facebook like interactions, if you like, but we want to have more robust evidence, both on the antinatalist community, but also the 4 cause areas that we're talking about. What are people's views on wild animal suffering as it relates to like individual wild animals? We don't really know that stuff. So yeah, conducting this kind of primary research, especially around attitudes, but also towards like areas of like impactful areas, activities that we can take to improve the world. That's our sixth key activity. So just to recap, there's networking, disseminating information, supporting organizations and individuals, community building, and then conducting our own kind of primary research.
Absolutely beautiful. Absolutely beautiful. I loved every bit of that. As far as research, I mean, yes. Oh my God. I mean, there is so much out there that has not been written about yet, not been fully researched. We have so precious little survey material. I mean, I think the last at least semi-professional survey of antinatalist communities online was in, I want to say maybe 2017. And that was published in part, at least, in I think issue 2 of Anti-natalist magazine. So I mean, a long time ago, and it wasn't. I mean, it wasn't peer reviewed. It's not. It's you can't even really find it very easily. Lack of research. Yeah, I mean that is absolutely something I would love to see a real effort and push towards the creation of. I mean, that is so important. I know that in some of the discussions that you, John, have had on Lawrence's channel, you guys have had together, there's been a bit of an interest, a bit of an exploration into sort of how antinatalism could fit into something like effective altruism, or whether that's an appropriate model, for the future of antinatalism. And I'm kind of wondering where both of your thoughts are on that now, because obviously, effective altruism has kind of hit like a difficult period of its own. And so, yeah, I'm curious if you both do feel like that's an appropriate model to work from, or how much that will come into play, with antinatalist advocacy.
I'm happy to jump in here, Lawrence, if you're happy for me to.
Yeah.
I think that, as you're saying, like effective altruism, I think that the ideas behind effective altruism in terms of having that impact focus and a real commitment to like applied ethics, and not just leaving like ideas and philosophy out there in the ether, but really trying to have a tangible positive impact in the world. I think that's really positive. I think the downfalls around effective altruism are more on the community dynamics kind of front. So for those of you who don't know, I'm sure the debacle you're referring to, Amanda, was the FTX kind of implosion. Without going into too much detail, you may have heard about Sam Bankman-Fried, who was very inspired by effective altruism to get a ton of money and then donate it to different causes. It looks like he did that to some extent. Also looks like he did some activities around like defrauding people and lying to investors and things like that, which aren't great. And a very much an ends justified the means kind of dynamic. And him being such a big funder within the EA space, it meant that people were kind of scared to call him out on these kind of things. So I'm not sure it was necessarily the ideological front that's led to EA being in this tricky spot, as opposed to the kind of community dynamics that allowed, like there weren't many checks and balances. A very kind of proactive kind of go-getter mentality, but not many checks and balances. And a lot of this has been exposed with the whole FTX debacle. I think, therefore, as antinatalists, it's good for us to look at the good things that EA has done and try and learn from the bad. So the good things, as we're saying, like that impact focus, that proactive kind of mindset. And I do think that so much of the EA materials out there, when it comes to things like animal agriculture, wild animal suffering, in some cases, as Lawrence was saying, with family empowerment media, even like human procreation, there's so much well-researched like action going on from EA that we can align with, that it would be a real missed opportunity if we didn't use the kind of research that they've done and the activities they're doing, and support those actions or get involved in other ways and that kind of thing. Like there's just a treasure trove out there from EA that we are very much planning to make the most of with Antinatalist Advocacy. Interestingly, in the past few years, EA has become really big on long-termism, and this is maybe a point where there is quite a big diversion between us as antinatalists and some of the leading lights, if you like, in effective altruism. I'm not sure how much detail you want us to go into, Amanda, on long-termism.
I'm very familiar myself.
Yeah.
But I just want to say, I mean, it is so important to be an opposing voice, even if
Yes.
that's as far as the relationship between that side of effective altruism and antinatalism and long-termism can go. It's just being a presence in that conversation is absolutely paramount, because it's very easy for people to get swept up in sort of the falderall of long-termism, and it's a beautiful dream to a lot of people.
Yeah.
Whereas to us, it's a horrible nightmare. And so I appreciate at least having a goal to be an opposing view in that world. I mean, I think that's extraordinarily important. So long as and I hope that they're open to it. At least,
and there are many EAs who don't. They haven't drunk the long-termist Kool-Aid.
I'm glad to hear that, actually.
Frame it like that.
Yeah.
And this was confirmed because Lawrence and I went to meet Will McCaskill. Well, I went to meet him. Went
That's
to see
right.
him speak.
Yeah.
I'm sure you've seen the videos on Lawrence's channel. And I'm a big admirer of Will McCaskill, especially for that applied ethics impact focus. I'm a bit worried about this whole long-termist thing that he's pushing at the moment. But yeah, he confirmed, in the talk that there are many people, as I know on a personal basis, and some of the posts on the EA forum and things like that, there are many people within the EA community who are definitely not on board with this whole long-termist, we need to bring lots of beings into existence. If we don't, it'll be a tragedy, that kind of worldview. And we're hoping to provide some sort of community for those people as well. So those kind of EA people who don't align with the long-termist thing, but do align with the EA on many other things, and especially the 4 cause areas that we were talking about earlier.
That's an excellent goal, and I'm glad that there's an attempt to focus on what community can be built out of that end of EA, for sure. Excellent. Lawrence, did you have anything to add to this front?
Yeah, the only thing I would add is, as John was saying, that a lot of the issues as we see it are surrounding the EA community, and these are things that, as John said, we can take the things that we like and sort of learn from the mistakes that they've made. One thing I would say though is that some people may be skeptical even of the theoretical side. One very obvious question that gets asked to EA is, how do you measure something like the impact you've had in terms of well-being, reducing suffering, etc.? But I think that question is perhaps even bigger for antinatalists, because how do you measure how many beings you've prevented from coming into existence? Because you're never going to know the counterfactual, right? Of, if I didn't take this action, how many beings would have come into existence? So one thing that I don't want people to take away is these people, they're coming along, they're just going to adopt the EA framework of doing things. It doesn't fit with antinatalism, or it has loads of holes itself. These are things that, one, we're aware of, but also, we think that it's a good foundational framework, but we realize that, there are things that need to be updated. We will strive, as we can, to try and update those to the best of our abilities. But I mean, to be honest, fundamentally, I think one thing like being able to measure how many, if you can, by individual beings you prevented from coming into existence, I think there's no answer to this question, right? But we can get closer to a better evaluation, right? So this is something that we want to work on, but we also want to facilitate the community to answer these questions themselves, or think about these questions themselves. So that was one thing I just wanted to clarify, is we're not saying this is the EA framework and this is what we want antinatalism to be. We want essentially to take the EA framework as a seed and allow antinatalism to grow its own sort of plant or ecosystem with it, if you get what I mean.
Like I've often said, antinatalist activism is a Lego set with no instructions. And so what you are tasked to do is take the best bricks from the best sets and see what kind of, tower you can build out of it. I mean, we're writing the instructions, and we have to but you have to kind of peek at what, how other people have attempted to build their own sets out of it. So, everything comes back to a Lego analogy with me. But yeah,
that's such a great metaphor. Like at the moment, there's tons of Lego just laid out on the floor, but it's not built into anything just yet.
That really is the way I think about antinatalist activism. I mean, it's got no roadmap. It's got no instruction booklet. You do have examples like the Church of Euthanasia and Vehement, but the goals of those groups were pretty different, or yeah, I mean, to what I think a contemporary antinatalist movement is doing. So yeah, sorry, didn't mean to interrupt. Please go on.
No, at all. I was going to say, just following on from one thing Lawrence was saying, is that there's definitely not a clear, this is the most effective kind of answer out there. But one of the things that EA has done, and as someone who works in the charity sector in the UK, this attitude is actually quite rare, is that they really start from from foundations. Like before we act, like what does the evidence suggest to be a really impactful action? And it's that fundamental question of not being tied to a certain form of activism or a certain way of doing things. It's like, okay, starting from like first principles, if you like, what does the evidence suggest? And we're never going to know. Like if you waited until you were 100% sure, you would never do anything. But EA is quite good at saying, we're really going to try and be robust and then act upon our best understanding of the evidence. And it's the attempt that I think is the thing that we can take away. Not that we have to be 100% sure of everything, or not that we just take EA's recommendations at face value and say, the gods of EA know what's best. It's around having that proactive, impact-focused mindset and say, in this moment, what appears to be the most impactful thing.
Excellent. No, excellent point. Excellent point. I think you guys have exactly the right attitude moving forward on all this. Let me ask you guys this. I mean, I think a big problem in the antinatalist community is, one, there's a lot of fear amongst antinatalists about being vocal about this subject. That's been an issue that's plagued antinatalist activism for a long, long time, and I think will continue to some extent. There's also a lot of cynicism when it comes to its activism. I mean, most people don't really think there is anything we can do. Or, again, people don't see the instruction booklet. They see a pile of bricks on the floor. They have no idea how to make the assembly, and they don't think anybody else can either. And so a lot of a really tremendous amount with those two things together, the sort of lack of infrastructure and the amount of fear involved. And some of that fear is overblown and insane, and also very justified. I mean, we have a lot of antinatalists living in third world countries. As antinatalism becomes, or just dangerous circumstances all over the world, as antinatalism becomes more well known, I think there is going to be more danger associated with being open about these ideas. So how, I mean, that's definitely something in my own activism I've thought a lot about how you combat. I don't have good answers myself, but I mean, how do you what is both of your thinking on that front about how you sort of combat that, and how you motivate people, and how you give people a sense of this is not, I mean, I don't think you necessarily have to convince people that this is an important thing to be involved in, but that it's a safe thing, and it's a thing worthy of their energies. Yeah,
I think that's a really important point. And I have to reflect that I'm really lucky to live in the UK, and where I can talk about antinatalism. I mean, you get some social pushback, but you can do a Danny Shine in the UK and get your megaphone and yell at people not to have kids. Not that he does it in that kind of aggressive way, but we are so lucky to live in the country. Sometimes, yes. Sometimes, I mean, we're both big fans of Danny, Lawrence and I. But we are very fortunate that you can be active. I think one, as you're saying, that fear, it can be overblown, but in many cases is justified. I think one thing that we can do is by having the 4 cause areas, which individually are probably less controversial than antinatalism. And how, if you think about how you can have an impact there, it doesn't necessarily have to be the full antinatalist package, if that makes sense. So again, another thing with vegan activism, even by me saying vegan activism, a lot of it is around focused on you will be vegan. And I don't think the approach for us to take when it comes to antinatalist advocacy is we need to make everyone a sentiocentric antinatalist. It's more like, where can we have an impact in these areas? So I think one thing that people can do is, if they are worried about being an anti-natalist advocate because of like the terminology around it, is just be careful with the terminology and like not necessarily pin an anti-natalist badge to their chest, but then look at one of the cause areas and think about the impact that they can have there. You know, if being a card carrying antinatalist is really difficult, but you think you can influence the people around you to eat less meat or even go fully vegan, I mean, that would be, in my book, some great antinatalist advocacy that you're doing, because you'll be preventing a lot of sentient beings from being brought into existence by doing that. So I think by taking like a broader view, not being too worried about the label of like calling it antinatalist advocacy, and really focusing on the impact that you can have in a way that keeps you safe and, you know, that you feel comfortable doing. I think that's one way that you can still get active, even if being like a card carrying out of the closet antinatalist just isn't an option for you.
Excellent answer. It's a very healthy attitude to take. Fantastic. Lawrence, do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, the only thing I would add that's coming to mind is, so John was saying that, you know, if given that antinatalism itself is controversial, then, you know, maybe as we've broken it down by the 4 cause areas, but someone may break it down differently. Like, you can target a specific thing that's related, but maybe less controversial. One thing I would just add on top of that is like how you go about it. So sure, it may be controversial to do a Danny Shine. You know, not everyone can go into their town square with a megaphone, or maybe not even everyone can talk to their close friends or family. So it hasn't come out yet, but on my channel, my next video to come out is interviewing a guy in Somalia, about what it's like to be antinatalist there. And literally, it, in a country like that, you could be killed if you were to be open enough, right? And when I say open enough, maybe even just maybe doing a Danny Shine would maybe get you killed, or maybe put in prison. So yeah, there's definitely different religious, cultural, or individual contexts where certain methods are not open to you in a safe way, but there may be other methods that are open to you. So one method that again won't be open to everyone because it's a financial one, but given that we mentioned charities before, like, I do tell people that I donate to certain charities, but I don't have to, right? So if I wanted to help further antinatalism in some way, let's say I just picked family empowerment media like I was talking to before, I could set up a donation of however much I want to them each month, goes out of my bank account. I don't have to think about it, and I don't have to mention it to anyone. No one else in the world needs to know that I donate that money. That is a way, if you have the money to do that, and you can donate very little. You can start from a very little amount, and then if you begin to earn more in the future, increase the amount you earn, you donate. But that is a way that you can avoid any form of controversy or anything like that. And there will be many other forms of activism. So in most situations that people are in, they have access to the internet to varying degrees. Obviously, there are certain regimes that, you know, suppress your access to certain parts of the internet or whatever. But most people around the world have access to the internet, and everyone who has access to the internet, you can, as just one example, set up an anonymous social media account that disseminates reasonable, level-headed antinatalist information that's accurate, etc., all the, you know, caveats that need to be added or whatever. Yeah, so those are just 2 ideas of ways that I mean, if you don't have access to the internet and you don't have any money, I can't come up with any examples of activism you can do then. If you're in a situation where you don't have money, don't have internet, and you can't speak about it, then okay, maybe you can't do any activism. But that would probably be the case for any other like cause that you wanted to do activism for, to be honest. There are like certain thresholds that you need to get in, you know, in your life to be able to do some form of activism. But
well, in
there is
those
one
cases,
thing-
oh, sorry, go ahead.
So there is one thing you can do, and that is not have any children of your own.
Well,
And
yeah,
that's something that David Benatar points out, is that we have to be careful not to be naive and thinking we can go out there and change the whole world. Obviously, enough people working together are able to change the whole world. But like, one thing that you do hopefully have control of, and again, it depends on the different context and the different familial pressures. But if you can just not have children yourself, or not eat animals, whatever it might be, then you are making a difference in your own life.
Yeah,
that does have a positive impact.
Yeah, no, sorry, John. I just actually thought of an example of something someone in that situation could do. So if you don't have any money, no access to the internet, and you can't talk about antinatalism, one thing you could do is, just when it comes up in conversation, just remind people of the fact that having kids is not a mandatory thing. You know, so you don't have to go as far as to say, I don't agree with it, it's wrong, or something like that. You could literally just go to the step of somewhat questioning it in a mild way, because in a lot of places, especially very religious places, this just isn't seen as an option. You know, it's just the default, and it's never questioned. So just to question it in some way would be a form of activism.
Yeah, all excellent points, guys. I'm sorry for the interruption there. But yeah, I mean, there are certainly a lot of anonymous, silent ways of being very, very good activists. I mean, even things like translation, disseminating information on anonymous social media accounts and stuff. I mean, I think it's wonderful, wonderful, wonderful when antinatalists have the freedom to be doing what we're doing right now, which is creating content with our faces and voices and stuff. But not everybody can do that, and I don't think that should be a stumble. It doesn't have to be a stumbling block for people who can't do that for whatever reason, whether they feel uncomfortable or whether their circumstances don't allow it. All the examples that you guys gave of ways that people can get involved are great. And certainly not least of which is controlling your own behavior. Is not having the children, not eating the animals. I mean, that's as important as it gets, as far as this activism goes. Even basically, doesn't even have to be, voicing that you're against artificial sentience. That's actually probably not an opinion that's going to get you in trouble in a lot of religious circles. I mean, I don't know what the current stance on that is in a lot of religious circles, but they may actually agree with you on that one. I mean, that one actually might be a little bit safe. So excellent points all around. I wanted to ask you guys a little bit about, like, what do you think of what is your opinion about the relationship between antinatalist activists and antinatalist philosophers? Like, do you feel like that's an important thing to help foster? Do you think that antinatalist activists should be working with the antinatalist philosophers and building those relationships? Is that part of the path forward in the opinion of both of you?
I can go first. Yeah, I think it's an important relationship to nurture. There are a bunch of different paths you can take, but one potential path that I'll just lay out is, to my knowledge, there is, and I could be completely wrong on this, but to my knowledge, there is no one working full time on antinatalism in a theoretical / academic sense. Now, there are people who work on antinatalism, the most famous probably being David Benatar, but he doesn't work on it full time, and he has to, as just as an example, has to spend time marking students' work, etc., etc. And maybe to some degree, just using him as an example, may feel, as he's documented, not at liberty to fully express himself. As him as an example is come into some trouble at his university in South Africa, and very serious trouble. If there are people who aren't aware of this case, there have been people who have died as a result of the controversies at his university.
I did just want to make a quick point. None of that actually had to do with antinatalism, though. Just so people know.
Yeah.
Just to dispel that real quick.
So none of the controversies were to do with antinatalism, but you know, you don't have to have a wild imagination to see it spilling over into antinatalism. But anyway, so one example of a relationship that activists can have with academics, because academics as a class of people tend to not be the sort of people who want to get into the rough and tumble of activism that other people do. Not that activism has to be rough and tumble. I didn't mean it like that. But one thing that we could do is collectively help to try and fund in some way a full-time committed researcher or person who explores antinatalism and how it links to different issues. You know, in a wild circumstance, maybe we could even do that for David Benatar, but who knows? And there are loads of practicalities you'd have to work out there, right? Like, how do you ensure that this income is going to be stable if it's decentralized and it's coming from lots of small donations from hundreds or thousands of different people? But this is just an example of something that could be done as a way of relating to what between activism and academia. Another thing could be activists communicating with academics about what are maybe the things that we could be focusing on. So we've broken down antinatalism into 4 cause areas, right? But some academic who's working on antinatalism and how it relates to different topics may discover a whole new area that actually is not being addressed by these 4 ways that we've broken it down into, right? If we had someone working full time researching these sort of things and thinking about them, someone who is used to the rigorous standard of academia and all of this sort of stuff, this would be something that's really useful. One other final thing that I'll note before going over to John is another thing we could do is like soliciting for as activists and maybe putting up prize money for or something like that is trying to solicit academics or philosophers to actually poke holes in antinatalism. Like, we could fund criticism, right? Because the more criticism we receive that's actually constructive, rather than just people being, unconstructive, but the constructive stuff that we get will actually be able to help us improve what we do, right? So that's another thing that we could do, is help, maybe as one example, we crowdfund, I don't know, $5,000 or whatever, as an example, and put that up as a prize of there's a open call for people to put forward either criticisms of antinatalism or antinatalist activism, or ideas for the best way forward for antinatalist advocacy, and then the best, some sort of decision-making process is put together, and then the person who's made the most valuable contribution as deemed by the decision-making process receives the prize money, right? That's just, one other example.
All fantastic thoughts. I love it. I love every bit of it. John, what do you say about all this?
Yeah, I was going to say, when you ask about the relationship between activism and philosophy, this is where I really admire Peter Singer in particular. Not necessarily even for the things he's written about, but how his approach has always been one of get these philosophy ideas out of the classroom, out of these huge textbooks, and try and apply them in the world, in a way that really does make the world better. I think that's, for me, the legacy which I really most take from him. Not even necessarily any of his particular ideas, some of which I like and some of which I don't. It's more that approach of, we need to get this philosophy, these ideas about ethics away from not just in the seminar room, but really do get them out there and try and have some positive impact in the world. So I really think there is a huge role. I mean, Lawrence has gone over some of like the practical ways of bringing this about, but I think there's a huge role for philosophers to play in antinatalism, both, making the case, criticizing, all the things that Lawrence said. So yeah, supporting philosophers to get out there and get their ideas out there is definitely something that would be interesting doing.
I just had one other additional thing to add is, so both academics and activists will have their eye on the sort of lay of the land, but as we were talking about before, long-termism, there's you know, a lot of people out there that support it, but there's also a lot of people out there that are critical of it. If anti-natalists, just as a way of relating to academics, long-termism has been put forward, by famously Will MacAskill in his book What We Owe the Future, in a sort of semi-academic way, right? It's also supposed to appeal to the average, well, maybe not average person, but someone who's interested in these ideas but isn't academically trained. But we could fund anti-natalist academics to specifically write on that issue, and other issues that we identify as well. I think that could be something that's valuable, and it could help turn the tide on specific ideas. So if going forward there is no anti-natalist criticism of long-termism may become more popular than it would have if we had funded anti-natalist criticism of it from academics. Maybe in some way being able to collectively commission some academic or other person to write a book critiquing long-termism or with an alternative, something like that.
Yeah, I mean, I want to see every bit of that happen. That would be absolutely amazing. So great ideas here. So let me, by the time this episode comes out, it's going to be out on July 1st. July 1st, from what I understand, is the inauguration date. That is the date that Antinatalist Advocacy will officially be announced. So what is that day going to look like? What can people, expect to see? I mean, they'll come watch this episode. That'll be one of the things that'll alert them to the birth of this new organization. But what else can people immediately expect to be able to find?
Do you want to take this one, John, or shall I?
You can take it, mate, if you like.
Cool. So on the actual day of July the 1st, there's not going to be like fireworks and stuff like that. What's essentially going to happen on July the 1st, as we see it, is this will obviously come out. We will, I'm assuming, get onto this in more detail in maybe the next question or something, given that we're mentioning it now. But we have three core projects that we're going to be working on initially, and then obviously, who knows what the future may hold. But on the first, the first of the projects will have its first tangible thing come out. So John can talk about this more later, but the first episode of a new podcast will be coming out on the 1st. So people on the 1st will have two podcasts that they can listen to. So if you're listening to this one and you haven't listened to the other one, go ahead to the other one. You'll find out, the link will be in the description. I guess Amanda will put it in there, and you'll hear more about what actually it will be by John later. And then, our social media accounts and stuff will publish, and, we'll be putting information out on social media so people can follow the organization there and keep up to date with everything else. But yeah, on the first, it'll be those two podcast episodes, this one and the other one, the social media accounts. And then I'm not sure anything else will happen actually on the day of July the 1st, but then in the coming weeks and months, you will see more activity to happen around the three projects that we're going to be working on.
That sounds wonderful. Yeah, I'd love to hear about these projects for sure.
Well, John, do you want to go into, given that I've mentioned the one you're leading on, do you want to go over that first?
Sure. So as Lawrence was mentioning, we're planning a podcast creatively called the Antinatalist Advocacy Podcast. And the focus of this podcast will be around ideas and, importantly, like implementing them as well, ways to get active, different forms of activism, philosophy, that kind of thing. So very much in the idea, like the applied ethics kind of space, which is a pretentious way of saying ideas on how to, ideas on how to get active and really putting those ideas into process. We've got a first episode coming out on the 1st, very much an introductory one with me, Lawrence, and Alana, who, as Lawrence mentioned earlier, sadly can't be with us here today. And then future episodes, we've got one planned with yourself, Amanda, to go through like as a bit of an introduction to antinatalism, both as a philosophy and as a community. Another one on introducing effective altruism and also responding to some EA arguments, some arguments from people within the EA community related to antinatalism. So keep your eyes peeled, your ears open for that. We're also looking to have some dissenting voices on there as well. So definitely not looking for this to be an echo chamber. So if you do know anyone if we're very much open to suggestions in terms of guests to bring on, and we'll definitely be having like series based upon the 4 cause areas. So procreation, animal agriculture, wild animal suffering, and artificial sentience. We'll be doing individual episodes about those in like kind of series. So that's basically a flavor of what we're looking to do with this podcast, as I was saying, like ideas and activism and like how to apply them.
Wonderful. Well, I truly mean this when I say it. I am always excited to see more and new antinatalist podcasts. I think it's a wonderful, wonderful way of getting the ideas out there. And it, because it's not just on YouTube, it can go on other platforms. It has pretty large reach. I mean, so it's a wonderful way of disseminating the idea. So congratulations to you guys on that alone. And I'm very much looking forward to not only hearing the first episode, but being on one of the upcoming ones. So that's really wonderful. You mentioned it. Does Alana also has another podcast as well?
Yes, that's right. So as we were mentioning earlier, like one of the key aims of Anti-natalist advocacy, as well as like providing opportunities for people to get active and spaces to explore the ideas, and other things around like supporting individuals, and especially taking a more kind of like positive approach towards antinatalists, but towards antinatalism in general. So Alana is looking to share ways and like share conversations with people around like life as an antinatalist, what that looks like, how people can be healthy, happy people, to support them to get active. We recorded our first episode that will be coming out on the 15th, the other day. And that podcast will be called Embracing Antinatalism, embracing in terms of like, just like as a really positive thing in people's lives. Like for me and Alana, definitely, I know that embracing antinatalism has definitely made my life a lot better and made me a lot happier. And as we were mentioning earlier, in some antinatalist spaces, you maybe wouldn't think of it as such a positive thing. So, this all feeds into our aim, as I was saying, to support individuals, to bring people together, create spaces for people to support themselves, to get active, and just live happy lives as antinatalists.
Beautiful. So I didn't realize this. So this is the birth of not only one new antinatalist podcast, but 2. So they're going to explore antinatalism, then embrace it, and then advocate for it. So a triptych of
the Holy Trinity.
The Holy Trinity of plan forward. Beautiful. I love it. Well, that's wonderful. And I have to, I just wanted to say briefly, I mean, antinatalism has been an incredibly positive aspect of my life. So I'm glad to see a show dedicated to that, because it is a big part of this thing for me personally. I know it is for other people too, and I think it can be for a lot of other people moving forward. So that's wonderful. Lawrence, did you have anything else to say on this part?
Not on those 2, but I can tell you about the third project if you'd like.
I would love that, please. Mm-hmm.
So the third one, so if you didn't catch already, John is obviously leading on the first podcast, Anti-natalist Advocacy. Alana's leading on the second podcast, Embracing Antinatalism. And then I'm leading on the third project, which isn't a podcast. So we're not releasing 3. The third one is a conference. So we want to, like we said, we want to disseminate information, and we want to, provide opportunities for networking and for people to explore ideas and find out what the best path forward and stuff is. So this conference, I can't give out too much information now, but obviously, this, by the time people listen to this, they'll the social medias will be launched and stuff. So just, follow us on the social medias. We will also have a newsletter, so sign up to the newsletter and stuff, and you'll hear all the updates and stuff. But the information I can give now is that it will be in early December, and we will be doing it across 2 days, and we will be hosting a range of people on a range of subjects that span the 4 cause areas, but also further. We want to also host both panels and speakers, so individual speakers talking on a topic that they're knowledgeable about, but also panels about a different specific subject that we then get people with different inputs giving their ideas about that. And that will be, it'll be virtual, so it's not in person. We want it to be virtual so that more people can attend and listen and benefit from it. It'll be free, and I'm not sure how much more I want to give at this point, because it's something that basically you'll be hearing more about as we get closer to the time. But definitely, if you follow the social medias and stuff like that, you will hear everything that you need to hear about it, and all the announcements. But it's something that I've got to say, I've been quite daunted about organizing, because it's I'm sure they won't mind me saying this, but I'll say in a very vague way, I've been learning from the Child Free Convention, but to put it in a very vague way, because I don't know what they want me to share, but I've been learning from what they've been doing, and hopefully it'll be somewhat similar to something like that, essentially, for the experience that someone is going to have. And I'm looking forward to it. It's a bit daunting, but I think it's going to be, really valuable, and something that can compound over time and get better and better. And who knows, maybe one day be in person.
Oh, I would love that. Well, I am absolutely delighted to hear that that's the third project that could not receive better news. I mean, I don't blame you at all for feeling a bit daunted, because that is a massive undertaking. I mean, look, I did the Antinatalist Film Festival online for 1 day, and I thought it was going to kill me. So a 2-day event in the style of like the Child Free Convention is absolutely massive, but there's almost nothing more needed than something of that scale. And of course, I hope that it can grow up into being an in-person event, but massively important for it to be an online event, perhaps even more so in some respects, because it can involve so many more people that way. So, I mean, congratulations to both of you for trying to put something like that together. Shout out to Lenora and Cody, by the way, because they've done a wonderful job on the Child Free Convention. But I'm really could not be happier to hear that there's going to be an antinatalist iteration. So wonderful. So I mean, all the projects you guys have, these three starting projects moving forward, everything that you guys have detailed today is massively exciting to me. I know it will be for I hope everybody listening. How can people best support antinatalist advocacy? I mean, what is support for you guys going to look like? How can people help out? Please let me know any. I mean, obviously, as soon as I have them, and as soon as this comes out, all of the relevant links will be down in the description. So please go make sure to watch everything, go check everything out, subscribe, follow, all that. But how can people best support the work that you guys are doing?
Well, I think you've covered quite a few of those there, Amanda, in terms of sharing and subscribing, that kind of thing. We're definitely in these early stages, very much in the disseminating ideas kind of phase, if you like, of getting these ideas out there. I realize one thing that we haven't actually mentioned is our website, which will have a ton of information and links on there, pages in each of the 4 cause areas, links to ways that you can get involved, donation recommendations, suggestions for, links to careers advice as well for people who would like to get active that way in each of the 4 cause areas. So another means of like getting information out there. So please do check out our website as well as our social media pages. In terms of donations, I know that we're looking to set something up in the future, Lawrence, but right now, the main thing as we are in this disseminating information phase, is like, share, subscribe, all of that good stuff. Follow us on the different platforms, help get the ideas out there. You can reach out to us over email if you would like to get involved. As Lawrence mentioned, that we're looking to grow slowly, but not bite off more than we can chew. So we're not looking to get together a huge big team and then have like a flash in a pan effect. But if you'd like to get involved and think you have a particular skill set that could benefit us, we're very much in early days. Please do reach out over email, and we'll be sure to get back to you.
Yeah, so the only other thing I'd mention to what or add to what John just said is if like we said, in the future we will hope to accept donations ourselves so that we can expand what we're doing, but at the moment that is likely not going to be a thing straight away. So if people do want to if they do have the funds available and they want to donate and know that it's going to a good place, the organizations we've mentioned in this podcast, links to all of them will be on the website, and people can set up donations to those organizations. Make sure, if it's an option in your country, make sure to do what we call in the UK gift aid. So a lot of governments will add money to your donation, basically. So
just to make it, just clarify, sorry, just to make your donation tax deductible. I think it's called tax deductible in the US.
Well, absolutely beautiful, you guys. I just want to say I'm really proud of the both of you. I mean, I think this is a huge undertaking, but it's looking to, absolutely fantastic so far. So congratulations to you, Lawrence, to you, John, and to Alana as well. I'm sorry she couldn't be here with us today, but I hope she feels better, and I hope to meet her at some point soon. I absolutely cannot wait to see all the ways in which antinatalist advocacy grows and forms and takes over the world and whatnot. And I'm here for every second of it. So absolutely cannot wait to see how everything develops. Thank you so much to the both of you for being my guests today on the Exploring Antinatalism podcast. Once again, everybody, please go check out the links below and support Antinatalist Advocacy. And my best to you guys. Wonderful work so far. Very, very exciting.
Yeah, thanks for having us on, Amanda. It's been really good.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Amanda. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Lawrence. Please see the links below that will take you to all the ways you can help support antinatalist advocacy. Thank you for listening to the Exploring Antinatalism Podcast. Please follow the podcast on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. Exploring Antinatalism can also be heard on Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Buzzsprout, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Amazon.com, and so many other platforms. You can email me at exploringantinatalism@gmail.com. Website designed by Visions Noirs. Please follow him at www.bionoir.com and follow him on Instagram. Logo art by Life Sucks. Please subscribe to him on YouTube and check out his shop on Etsy at www.etsy.com/shop/lifesuckspublishing. Music by Mati Hairi. You can hear the whole song, Life is a Sexually Transmitted Disease with a Mortality Rate of 100%, by following the link in the description. And make sure to also read his academic paper which inspired the song, If You Must Give Them a Gift, Then Give Them the Gift of Non-Existence, in the Cambridge Quarterly of Healthcare Ethics on cambridge.org. Links below.
Life is no thrill compared to nil. Life is no thrill. It's worse than nil. So draw the right conclusion. Let them be still.